in the 90s when you were really getting ramped up, you were hitting the right trajectory. Was there a time where you had an aha moment, or where you felt like, hey, woke up one day like this is really going to be successful? Was there any one defining moment?
There were several inflection points that we came to over the years with different decisions made at those times. So first inflection point came when we worked on a geographic territory orientation in Manhattan, south of 96th Street. When we had all the territories filled, we were at an inflection point. What do we do now? Do we start doing office leasing? Do we do mortgages? Do we rent stores? Or do we go to Queens and Brooklyn and sell buildings? And at that time, we made the decision that, you know what, we don't know anything about those other business lines. We know how to sell buildings. Let's go out to Queens and open an office in Queens. So opened an office in Queens, then opened an office in Brooklyn. This was way before it was cool and hip to go to the outer boroughs. Most Manhattan brokers thought their shoes would get too dirty if they went over the river. So we made those moves. And in later years, when we had all the New York City territories filled, we were at another inflection point. We looked at the markets in DC, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston. And so again, do we expand geography or do we get into other business lines? At the time, we had an advisory board, and one of our advisory board members was John Fowler from HFF. And he said, hey, you guys are selling so many properties, you should do debt and staple debt onto these sales that you're doing. And so we made the decision, rather than going to Chicago and then having to explain who we are and what we do, that we just take advantage of the very long relationships we had with so many people in the city and offer them another service. So we got into the mortgage business, which worked out really well for us. After 9/11, so many companies were downsizing in New York. We were in a recessionary period, and we saw these great quality people were being let go. Companies were downsizing. There were brokers who were out of work. There were attorneys who were out of work. We went out, hired a director of HR. We said that all these great quality people out there, New York is tough, New York's gonna bounce back, go hire everybody. And so we had 21 people at 9/11. 2 years later, we were 150. 2003, the market came roaring back, and we were in great position to take advantage of it. And that's when the outer boroughs really started to take off too. So 03, 04, 05, 6, 7, we had a run that just really took off. And so if there was ever a moment where we said, you know what, we got this, it was probably in that 2003, 2004 period where the company was really growing beautifully, the market was cooperating, and it just seemed like everything came together really nicely for us. But that move was kind of counterintuitive at the time and could have sank us. If the market didn't come back, we're out of business.
And then getting into 07, 08, 09, what was that time like after you had really 6-7x your company?
Yeah,
from a personnel standpoint.
2007 was unbelievable, peak of that market cycle. In fact, we got an offer from a big national firm to sell the firm. We danced with that idea for a while. We made the decision that probably 2014 was the time at which we would sell, because having negotiated a potential deal in 07 taught us that when we did sell, we'd be on 5-year contracts. And so we said, well, in 2015, Paul will be turning 55. Paul's 2 years older than me. And we thought that the perception of the value of our 5-year contracts would be better if we were in our 50s than if we were in our 70s or 80s. So we said, if the market doesn't stink in 2014, that's when we should look at selling the business. And so 2014, we went through 2008, 2009, which was terrible times again. 2009, the volume of sales in New York City was down by 92%. So it was really, really challenging. 2014 comes along, the market is going gangbusters. As it turns out, it was absolutely the perfect time to sell, because in 2014, there were 5,534 buildings sold in New York City. That was an all-time record by more than 10%, and it hasn't even been close to that since. So in retrospect, people look at it and say, wow, you guys sold at the perfect time. Well, it really wasn't a conscious decision. made at that time because we knew the market was so good. It was a decision made in 2007 because we thought from a timing perspective, based on our ages, it would be the right time. And it just so happened the market was incredible at that time.
So I've heard you say that you still enjoy cold calling. Is that true?
I do.
Because a lot of people would say you don't need a cold call.
Well, most of the calls I'm making are not cold calls, truly cold calls. There are some. I do, a handful, a couple of dozen every week. I'm calling people I never spoke to before. But the overwhelming majority of my prospecting calls are warm calls because I know most of these folks. I've met them, talked to each other several times. That's one of the byproducts of being around for 40 years is you know a lot of folks. But I think it's so important that prospecting is the gasoline that makes the car go. And I still to this day, my focus is connecting with 100 owners every week. And it's been up until the pandemic, it was getting to 50 owners a week, and for many, many years that was the goal. During the pandemic, I came to realize I could talk to 100 owners a week, and that's been the case ever since. So, prospecting is the best way to generate business, and that's where the rubber meets the road in this business, is generating business.
You've said that the most difficult people to reach at times are sometimes the most important people that you want to reach. So is there one example or a couple of examples you could give that points to that case study?
Sure. Well, I always use as the example Harry Knakal, who's big owner in New York, a titan of commercial real estate here, investor, developer. And Harry owned a small property in my territory up on East 60th Street back when I first started cold calling. And I cold called him for 2.5 years before he'd take my call.
Where were the calls going?
His secretary would answer and took a message every time. It was very, very nice, but he never called me back. But I kept going through the books, calling, leaving. I had 2.5 pages in my catalog with left message. And I called him one night around 7 o'clock. He picked up the phone himself. I said, "Hey, Mr. Knakal, Bob Knakal from Coldwell Banker." He said, "Yeah, I know who you are. You leave messages for me all the time. What do you want?" And, I forget the exact numbers, but I've done something like 15, 16 deals with Harry, about $400 million worth of stuff. And it turned out to be a great relationship. But the point is that if you are just calling somebody for the first time, they don't know who you are, and they'll talk to you for 20 minutes. They're talking to everybody. But the people who you have trouble getting to, everybody's probably having trouble getting to. And most people, after 2 or 3 calls, they don't get a call returned. They give up, and you can't give up.
So on that note, what time of the day do you think is the best time to cold call? Is there from a psychological standpoint, is it early in the morning? Is it late at night? You called him at 7 o'clock?
It's always been, I think the highest probability of getting folks on the phone is probably between 10 and 12 and 2 and 5. Although I will say during the pandemic, the differentiation between weekend days and weekdays disappeared. So I started calling people on the weekends. And actually, I found that if somebody picks up, if they don't want to talk to you on the weekend, they're not going to pick up the phone. But if they do pick up, they're very relaxed. There's no pressure. You have a much different type of call. So I still make some calls on Saturdays and Sundays to folks. And I find if I get somebody on the phone, that's a really great quality conversation. One
of my closest friends that I work with often, he's a developer, but he always jokes with me, Fridays are the best day to cold call people because everybody's in a good mood. So he'll text me, Friday's great day to cold call.
Love it.